We got multiple Habs trade updates as a recent report indicates that Montreal will likely not make a big deadline move unless the bottom falls out of the team. But we have another list from Renaud Lavoie of top trade candidates, and one specific Habs player, Kaiden Primeau, is the only Hab to show up on the list. There's some names that are very surprisingly not there. We have a lot to dive into coming up on this episode of Habs Digest, and we're just going to dive straight into it. But I want to start with Juraj Slafkovsky because we want to talk a bit about Slav, right? Slav himself, he hasn't had a great stretch of games, Jesse. There's, by no stretch of the imagination has he been elite, but he's been getting better, right? It's okay. He can still have a couple of bad games here and there, but he actually had some comments on his recent performances, and, well, it's kind of interesting to see how lighthearted he's taking it. He said, I don't know what I've been doing lately, but today was a little better, talking about yesterday's win versus Vancouver. He said, I was skating a little more, passing a little better. It's funny how I played in those last two games, and yeah, it is kind of funny. Don't really know what was going on with Slav there, Jesse, but I'm really glad to see him bounce back against Vancouver. He did look like a different player. He's still very young. He's the youngest player on this team, even though he looks a lot older than Lane Hutson. He is younger, and I feel like, he's okay to have a couple bad games here and there, but the way he played against Vancouver shows us exactly why he got that extension.
Yeah, it's so nice that he's just kind of taking ownership over us. And obviously, it was no secret in Montreal and abroad. Like, we kind of knew, okay, something just wasn't right over their last two games. But, last night, he got back to it, Josh, of kind of quietly still producing those points, kind of doing his job, great board play to get the puck over Suzuki, then to Caufield. That's kind of the recipe over there. Suzuki being the playmaker, Cole being the finisher. But Josh, I'm demanding when it comes to Slav, I want him to play his role in that line. I know that's that on the boards. I know it's winning those puck battles, but I want to see him as a shot threat as well.
Yes.
I want to see him so much more selfish with the puck. I know we got Line and Cole on that power play. Have we seen one-timer being sent to Slav's direction this entire year? I think, honestly, that needs to be changed. I'm looking at you, Matheson. No, I'm just joking. We can't blame him anymore. It's not his fault, but Slav needs to get his looks on the power play, on the one-timers, even 5v5. I just want to see him more as a shot threat and kind of giving himself a little bit more credit for the amazing shot that he has and just letting it rip more.
I'm down for that because he's the only lefty forward out there. Of course, Lane Hutson's out there running the show at the point, but Slav's the only lefty forward. I don't mind that every now and then, and he's shown the ability to score those multiple times throughout his career, right? And I know he's working well as a net front presence, and Kirby Dach, though, has been kind of taking that role with Patrick Laine out, and I know it's really Suzuki, Caufield, Laine, and Hutson who are running the show, and Slav is kind of doing what he needs to make things work, but I don't mind that. I'm okay having Laine be that hub, but every now and then, surprising other teams, a guy that can legitimately be a one-time weapon on that other side could be really good. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts on Slav. Should he move over to that spot on the power play? And what do you think of his last few games? Are you worried, not worried? I'm optimistic. Glad he's taking this with a good sense of humor, and I know he's going to lock in and have a great stretch down the road. But we got to talk about some trade stuff, Jesse. And look, we can talk about Slav all day, but there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out about Montreal and who's going to stay, who's going to go. And there have been a lot of articles coming out about the state of the Habs heading into this deadline. And I'll be linking two down below, including Renaud Lavoie's list and an article talking about David Bernstein from the fourth period on TSN, and that's what I'm going to get into first, actually. And he mentions in his article that Montreal's not going to make any trade unless the bottom falls out. I'll get into the quote in just a second, but to preface it, he kind of says, for some teams, buying at the deadline sends the right message. If a club's competitive but needs to fill holes, going out and adding that missing piece is critical. In the Canadiens' case, this season might be about sending the wrong message to the locker room by selling off pieces. And if we go to the quote that he had, he said, well, with the one caveat of someone's going to offer you a first-round pick and a great prospect for David Savard, you're going to make that trade, right? If you get 2 seconds for Jake Evans, you're probably going to make that trade. So to hear him say that he doesn't believe, according to what he's heard, that Montreal is going to make any trades unless the bottom falls out, what do you think about this, Jesse? Is it really sending the wrong message if you get decent offers? Or will it take an extravagant offer like a first-round pick and a great prospect for Savard, which I'm going to be honest, is probably never going to happen? Would it take something like that for Habs fans to accept it? Because, look, I get it, we're in the mix. Montreal will be out of a playoff spot by tonight, unfortunately, because Columbus plays Pittsburgh. It's just the way the math's going to work out. It sucks. What do you think? Do you think it really would be sending the wrong message to have good asset management and move on from expiring deals?
It's going to be a little bit of balance, Josh, but trading Sean Monahan hurt last year. And a lot of the guys, they even said, like, when this is happening, they said, you know what, like, it was tough trading Sean, but like, hopefully this is the last year. Obviously, players might have a different viewpoint on management. You know, like the players just want to go for it. Management, rightfully so, might have some other expectations. The future still matters a lot for the Habs, but with the Carey trade, we're seeing time and time again that the present is really mattering that much more. David Savard, I feel, will be traded at this trade deadline or even significantly before it, due to there not being too much competition there on the right side. But like, Josh, over these last couple games, we've gotten a look at what this decor will look like without David Savard. These are very important insights for Kent Hughes to get to see, well, how would it look if I trade Savard? Like, would this team kind of would the wheels fall off the wagon, right? Because we know if they are in the mix for the playoffs, we know that definitely Gordon's a competitor, but there's always that one team every year that just goes on that Cinderella run. Now, I'm not saying that it's the Montreal Canadiens, that if they get on into the playoffs, they're going to go on that Cinderella run and keep Savard for it. I'm just saying there's one team every year that just surprises and ends up going to run at least to a conference final, kind of at least something like this, right? So, you know, it's going to be interesting to kind of balance this. I feel like it's probably for this reason of finding the balance of like, okay, well, we're going to keep Evans. We're probably, if we weren't doing so well, we probably would trade him. But I think Savard, the writing's on the wall there.
Yeah, like, and we'll get into that in just a second as well. Like, you make a great point that we're now seeing Montreal without him. I mean, we've seen it a few times this season, but right now with the addition of Carrier, it looks more stable than ever, and Struble is a perfect replacement for Savard on that third pairing. He's not quite as good, but he could very well get there because he's still so young, right? So there's a lot of things Montreal can do. That's the one guy that I think is for sure gone. As for forwards, it seems like Jake Evans is working on an extension. Armia, I can see him leaving being a pretty big blow because of how good he is on the penalty kill, even Dvorak, how good he is on the faceoffs, but there's going to be some moves, right? But if we look at some other things that came out recently, including Renaud Lavoie's list of top 25 people that are on the block, according to the things that he has heard, like or hate Renaud Lavoie, it is what it is. He does have some sources. And so on his list, though, of the 25 people he listed, now I'm sure this doesn't mean that Savard is not up for trade. Like, that's probably not the case, right? He probably is in talks, but he's not on this list. The only Hab to appear on this list, Jesse, is Cayden Primeau, among some other big names, JT Miller, Brock Besser, Norris, and some other ones we might get into in a minute. But Cayden Primeau, of course, goes down to Laval, plays a great game. He's the first star of the game he goes down into. He's had good numbers with Laval his whole career. I mean, look, I know the whole reason that we didn't want to waive him last year is because we thought a team would claim him. If he can still put on a decent run in Laval, do you think he'd actually have some trade value? Do you think teams would be willing to offer some kind of maybe mid-round draft pick for a guy like Cayden Primeau just to say, hey, you know, it didn't work out there, but maybe we'll give you a fresh start, give you a chance?
He would, because there's not much competition. Obviously, he's going to need to build up his value in Laval. He's off to a very good start, making 27 saves just the other night. But really, the big thing is like some teams like Ottawa are looking around right now. Some of our competitors for that final wildcard spot, just a playoff spot in general right now, with Allmark being out, they've kind of been looking around and they're checking, they're calling different GMs, and they're realizing there's not a ton of guys kind of available. There's not too many kind of curveballs. It's kind of what you see is what you get, sort of thing like that. So other than maybe like a John Gibson, you know, definitely Cayden Primeau would need to up his value significantly. I think for the Ottawa Senators feel like it's worth that type of investment there. But I mean, there is a demand. So if Primeau does play well, there is a way that he could work himself into an NHL career. Just probably not in Montreal.
Probably not. And you know, another thing I'm thinking of, like, a lot of teams love to trade, especially like tanking teams, or oh no, Gary Bettman hates that word. Teams that are not in the mix. Let's just say that. Those teams like to sometimes trade their goalies around the deadline to another team to maybe give them a nice backup, this kind of thing here and there. And sometimes those teams don't have a guy who they'd love to bring up from the AHL. They might be willing to give up a mid-round draft pick to bring in a guy like Primeau, right? Have a nice, fairly young 25-year-old replacement to come in and fill a hole that's left by a goalie they traded away. I'm just saying, it's not impossible for Primeau to move, right? I don't know what just happened to the camera, but to get traded. So we'll maybe leave that, more discussions on that for another day, because I'm still surprised, Jesse, that Savard's not on that list. That's kind of insane to me. He's on this list, but I wanted to highlight before this video ends a couple guys that are on that list that I think are interesting. So there's a lot of cool names on this list. Besides, like you mentioned, John Gibson, Anthony Beauvillier, Quebec guy. Don't see him coming to Montreal, but there's a couple names that are at the bottom. Mikko Rantanen's a name that we've talked about coming to Montreal a few times. Will it happen? Probably not. He's probably going to demand 13, 14 million this offseason as an unrestricted free agent. But you also got Mika Zibanejad, who has been quite bad. You talk to Darius over at Rangers Digest. He'll give you a nice little breakdown of how bad Zibanejad has been. But these guys, Jesse, like, Rantanen may be more interesting than Zibanejad. Is there ever a world where Montreal becomes like a super buyer and tries to poach one of these guys? Don't know if it'd really be poaching Zibanejad. I don't want him. That contract seems like a horrible deal until 2030. But a guy like Rantanen, he's a UFA. I know it costs a lot to get him, but I know, I'm just throwing something out there for the end of this video. Do you think there's any world at all where Montreal maybe makes a call?
I think you have to make a call, right? Obviously, it's just the logistics. If he's a center, you're probably going hand over foot here. But obviously, an amazing player. 58 points in 41 games this year, 104 points last year. So, of course, that type of star potential is very exciting. When we look at our wingers, though, like I'm happy with a Cole Caufield. I like Demidov. I like Line. Not to say that, Montreal isn't too good for Rantanen. We're not trying to get at that, right? But I think we're still trying to develop Slav. We're still trying to kind of find those right pieces, but I think you definitely need to inquire. But I think, Colorado's looking to keep him around as well.
Yeah, like Montreal has some stuff that they could give up for him, but Colorado wants to make a push right now. Like, they've made some moves that indicate that they want to go, right? They even traded for like a bottom 6 guy in Yuso Parson, and they traded for Blackwood, the Wedgwood, right? They want to be in the mix right now. They have no reason to move Rantanen. The only reason they would is if he told them, I'm not re-signing, or if Colorado said, we're not paying you what you want. And that's a big risk when you trade for a guy as well. But hey, you never know. His name's on Renaud Lavoie's list. What that means is up to you. But that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. Let us know your thoughts on all these Habs trade talks down below, because it's starting to get interesting. We're 2 months out exactly till the trade deadline, so there'll be a lot more to come between now and then. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.